Forced by her own parents, a 13-year-old girl was forced into a marriage with a wealthy sheik, who offered a high dowry in exchange for the union. Even though she begged in tears not to go through with it, her pleas were ignored. However, the moment the groom said yes, a surprising revelation about the true reason for the marriage and a hidden secret changed everything in an unexpected way. "I don't want to marry that old man, Mom. Please don't do this to me." Alice screamed, her voice cracking from crying so much, while shaking with fear. Her words were barely audible, muffled by the tears that stained her white dress, making it even heavier and more symbolic of her imprisonment. Thais, the mother, seemed indifferent to her daughter's pain. Coldly and precisely, she arranged the last details of the outfit, as if dressing a doll for a ritual. The dress, instead of representing a dream, more resembled a forced armor. Feigning tenderness, he adjusted the shining crown on the girl's hair, and then took another step towards the inevitable. Thais took a step back, looking at her daughter with a satisfied smile, and murmured, "You look stunning, my dear." Alice, overcome with anxiety, instinctively pulled away. Her trembling hands tightly gripped the fabric of her dress. "Mom, please. I'm only 13. Get me out of here. I don't want to marry that old man," she pleaded, her voice almost swallowed by desperation. Her gaze wandered, as if she were still searching for an impossible way out. Ignoring her daughter's plea, Thais put a finger to the girl's lips and whispered, "Silence, my angel. One day you'll understand. All of this is for your future." Her voice had a tone too sweet to be sincere, contrasting with the greedy shine that betrayed her true intentions. Consumed by indignation, Alice pulled away. "That's a lie. You only think about yourselves," she shouted, her eyes swollen and red from crying so much. Losing her composure, Thais gave him a sharp look and replied coldly, "Never say something like that again. Your father and I have always done what was best for you. It's time for you to recognize that. It's time for you to reciprocate," Thais said firmly. "You're going to marry Sheikh Omar." Alice didn't answer. She remained silent, feeling her heart race and her breathing become increasingly uneven. It was then that Firmino, her father, entered the room, carrying the same air of forced enthusiasm that his wife displayed. "So, how is our princess?" he asked with an exaggerated smile, as if he couldn't see the despair in his daughter's eyes. Thais turned to him, swelling with pride, "Just look how beautiful she is. The sheik will be enchanted." And indeed, her appearance was impeccable. The white dress glided in delicate layers, decorated with handmade floral embroidery. A thin, translucent veil rested on her brown hair, held in place by a shiny tiara, studded with precious stones. On her delicate arms, gold bracelets shone in the light of the room. Her feet, shod in impeccable white shoes, completed the look. She looked like she had stepped out of a fairy tale, but everything about it was forced. None of it was her choice. Not even the sweet scent that surrounded her seemed like hers. It was all part of a scenario constructed to hide the horror that lived behind the appearance of a perfect day. With her face full of sadness, Alice stood out from all the grandeur around her. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, not daring to look at Firmino. Then the father knelt down, trying to reach his daughter's gaze, gently holding her chin and saying with forced tenderness, "Lift your head, my daughter. Today is an important day." Once again, Alice's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head, silently pleading, and between sobs she murmured, "Father, please, don't make me go through this. Can we go?" Firmino looked away, as if he were running away from the weight of his own decision. "Thais, bring a tissue," he ordered, with a firm voice and a closed expression. The wife, without hesitation, complied with the request. With resolute hands, he dried his daughter's face. "Enough crying," he decreed rigidly. "You must show yourself strong. In a few moments, you will be a princess, the wife of one of the most influential men in Arabia. This entire palace, this entire life, will be yours. And he repeated his words as if trying to convince himself. The smile on her face was more a disguise than an expression of joy. Alice, still trying to gather the strength to react, opened her mouth, but was interrupted when her mother pressed a finger to her lips. Silence. I've said too much, she declared, now with a menacing glint in her eyes. Firmino looked at his daughter firmly and declared. You're lucky, Alice. Many would dream of being in your place. Now, smile. Show yourself as the Princess of Arabia that you are about to become. At that moment, the door creaked open, revealing Ismail, the faithful assistant of the powerful Sheikh Omar. He cast a quick glance around the room before asking, in a firm voice. Is the bride ready? Yes, Firmino replied, with an enthusiasm that was difficult to disguise. His voice carried anxiety, ambition and a hint of triumph. Then come with me, Ismail instructed with a firm gesture. Alice's parents walked ahead, their faces lit with an almost greedy joy, as if they were about to achieve something precious. To them, this marriage meant much more than union, it was the path to fortune, prestige, and a life of excess. For others, this was the beginning of a life of unimaginable luxury. For Alice, every step was a challenge, like crossing a field full of traps. Breathing required effort. The environment around her, with the gleaming gold of the decoration, the intense perfume of exotic flowers, the soft melody in the background and the curtains dancing in the warm wind, all of this seemed to silently announce the imminent loss of her freedom. She walked with difficulty, her feet barely leaving the ground. The dress, heavy and elaborate, seemed more like a tangle from which she could not free herself, as if fate itself were wrapping her in its threads. From the outside, the scene seemed to have come straight out of an enchanted tale. From the inside, it was a suffocating nightmare from which there was no way to wake up. Alice looked around, trying to find a way out. But there was no escape. Guards positioned in every corner kept a close watch. The guests, fascinated by the spectacle, would not notice, or would not care, if she tried to escape. Every glance fixed on her became another wall, tightening her invisible prison even more. When she reached the main garden, where the ceremony would take place, her eyes turned, trembling, to the altar. And there he was, Omar, the sheik. An imposing man, with a face marked by time, eyes as cold as the desert at night and a smile full of arrogance. Alice's stomach turned. For a moment, the world seemed to spin and she feared she would faint. What will become of me after this, she thought, her heart clenching between fear and despair. She looked around, trying to find some sign of salvation. But there was nothing, only the blinding glow of ambition and the unshakable security of those around her. It was like falling into a silent and merciless trap. Before moving forward, Alice took one last look at her parents. She saw Thais smiling enthusiastically and Firmino, with the same satisfied expression, both blinded by the thirst for power and wealth. A single tear slid down Alice's face, tracing an icy path on her warm skin, carrying all the pain that her words could not express. How could you do this to me, she asked herself in her mind, while her heart broke silently. To understand how the young woman had been taken to that altar, it would be necessary to go back in time a little, a few weeks before that day marked by pain and silence disguised as celebration. On that distant afternoon, Omar found himself alone in his chambers. He was seated in a padded armchair, surrounded by soft carpets and fine wood furniture, carefully carved. His face, as usual, remained closed. Between his fingers, he held a photograph that he looked at with moist eyes. The silence was heavy, interrupted only by the whisper of the wind rustling the heavy curtains. Suddenly, the door creaked and Ishmael, his loyal servant and adviser, entered the room with firm and measured steps. Inclining his head in respect, he said. "Did you call me, Your Majesty?" Omar, in a hurry, put the photograph away before answering. Omar adjusted his cloak imposingly over his shoulders and walked towards his faithful servant. Ismail, observing him, noticed something unusual. There was a sparkle in the sheik's eyes that he had not seen for a long time. Omar, always rigid and with an austere expression, seemed momentarily filled with something similar to hope. "Yes, Ismail, I called you because I have an important task," the sheik announced in his deep, authoritative voice. Ismail promptly bowed and replied loyally. "What task would that be, my lord?" "As always, I am available to fulfill your will." To his surprise, a slight smile appeared on Omar's lips, a gesture so rare that it made Ismail hold his breath for a moment. The sovereign's firm gaze met his subject's, and he said clearly, "I am getting married. I need you to find me a wife." Ismail's eyes widened in astonishment. "Get married," he repeated, incredulous. Years had passed since he had heard any mention of a new marriage. Since the death of his former wife, the sheik had never shown any signs of interest in opening his heart again. Ismail, even though he wanted to see him less lonely, had always had his suggestions rejected. Now, on the eve of his 70th birthday, Omar declared that he wanted a new companion. 1,000 thoughts ran through Ismail's mind, but, true to his role, he maintained his composure. "I will do as you ask, Your Majesty. I will find a woman worthy of your position and organize a ceremony that will go down in history." Omar placed his hand firmly on the servant's shoulder and said, "I knew I could trust you." Although still surprised, Ismail nodded respectfully, ready to fulfill his master's unexpected wish. "Your Majesty, is there a preference?" Ismail asked respectfully. "Do you want a blonde wife? Brunette? Taller, shorter? Are there any essential characteristics that I should consider? I want to make sure that I find the ideal person for you." Omar walked slowly through the room, thoughtful. His footsteps echoed between the silent walls, as if he were pondering something that had been kept for a long time. "Appearance does not interest me, Ismail," he said finally, pausing for a moment. "What matters to me is age." "Age?" repeated the subject, confused. Omar approached the window and stared at the golden horizon of the desert, as if he found his certainty there. "I want my future wife to be 13. No more, no less. 13 is the exact age." Ismail froze. His eyes widened for the second time in that conversation. He swallowed hard. His mind struggled to process what he had just heard. That disturbed him deeply. In his eyes, it was absurd. A 13-year-old girl was not ready for marriage, much less to marry someone so much older. He cautiously tried to ask, "Your Majesty, are you absolutely sure about that? Perhaps someone more experienced would be a better companion. A more mature woman could share her life with balance, understanding. Who knows, maybe someone in her 50s. Omar turned and answered firmly, shaking his head. "I don't want a woman of 60. Or 50. Much less 40. She's 13. Exactly 13. I hope you understand me." The air in the room grew heavy. Ismail realized that every word from then on would need to be carefully measured. Still, he tried one last appeal. "And, if it were someone of 20, at least. Still young, but..." Before he could finish, Omar gave him a hard look, his face now taken by an implacable seriousness. "You know me well, Ismail. You know what I'm capable of. Are you ready to do what I asked of you? You know I hate being contradicted. When I say I want a 13-year-old bride, that is exactly what I demand. 13, no more, no less." Immediately, Ismail bowed his head in respect. "As you wish, sir." Despite his obedient posture, deep inside he felt the weight of the moral dilemma crushing him. He knew that contradicting the sheik would not only put his position at risk, but also his very life. Although he found that request deeply disturbing, he was also aware that, in that country, nothing in the law prevented him from doing so. "Organize a grand banquet here in the castle, in a few weeks' time," Omar ordered, settling back into his armchair with an authoritative air. "Tell the parents who have 13-year-old daughters. Tell them that I will make my choice during the celebration." "Yes, sir. It will be done according to your will," Ismail replied, keeping his eyes on the floor before leaving. As he left the hall, Ismail's conscience weighed heavily. Doubt pounded in his mind like an out-of-time drum. He knew that, even within the law, that choice was morally indefensible. But what could he do? The answer was clear: absolutely nothing. So, with a divided spirit, he decided to ignore what he thought was right and continue with the imposed mission. On the other side of the door, Omar pulled out the photograph hidden under the folds of his cloak again. It was an old image, faded by time. Sitting in the armchair, he gently ran his fingers over the photo, and then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, a single tear ran down his stern face. Meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, on the coast of Brazil, the scene was very different. Amid the hustle and bustle of a popular fair, a man of about 40 years old, his face partially covered by a cloth, ran desperately between the stalls. In his right hand, he held a freshly caught fish, still dripping with water. Behind him, an angry crowd shouted, "Catch the thief! Hold him!" The hurried sound of footsteps echoed through the narrow corridors, mixing with the commotion of the merchants and customers. The man moved deftly, dodging people, knocking over fruit and scattering boxes in his path. Panting but swift, he made his way through the confusion with an almost feline agility. He knew those alleys like someone who knows the lines on their own hand. He ducked into a narrow alley with stained walls and exposed bricks, turned right, then left, winding his way around corners until he left behind the noisy crowd that was chasing him. He only stopped when he was sure he was alone. He removed the makeshift mask from his face and ran the back of his hand across his sweaty forehead. "That was close," he muttered, still catching his breath. He looked at the fish he was holding and a proud smile appeared on his lips. "At least we'll have a good dinner tonight." A while later, he arrived in front of a modest little house, with peeling paint and the wood of the door worn down by the years. He entered the small home with a triumphant air. Without worrying about formalities, he threw the fish into the kitchen sink. "Honey, look what I made for dinner." Thais, his wife, appeared in the hallway, visibly exhausted. Her eyes went straight to the fish and then fixed on her husband with disapproval. She crossed her arms with a heavy sigh. "Firmino, don't tell me you stole another fish. Is that all you know how to do now?" "It was either that or we'd go to bed on an empty stomach," he replied with a mischievous smile. "Now, clean that thing up because I'm starving." Thais grabbed the knife and approached the sink, huffing. As she began to clean the fish, she couldn't hold back her outburst. "You need to fix this life, Firmino. I can't stand this misery anymore. Living like this is a punishment." He dropped his body on the old sofa in the living room and let out a long sigh. "Take it easy, woman. I'm trying to get into a good scheme, but things aren't the same as before. People don't fall for easy tricks anymore." She rolled her eyes, her tired face revealing years of frustration and exhaustion. "Then get a real job, Firmino. This life of con artists won't get us anywhere. The situation is becoming unsustainable," she said, her voice breaking. Firmino responded with a dry, mocking laugh. "A job? That's not for me. I was born with the gift of fooling suckers. Sooner or later, an easy way to make money will appear." Thais dropped the knife into the sink with force, the metallic sound echoing through the kitchen. She crossed her arms and stared at him firmly. "You promised me a life like a queen when you took me from my parents' house, Firmino. You said we would live in comfort. And so far, we've only been in need." He approached slowly, placing his hands on his wife's shoulders. "You always knew who I was. A born scoundrel. I've always lived off of this, cheating, small scams. That's exactly what attracted you, remember?" Thais looked away, shaking her head regretfully. "I know. But I believed you would grow up, I don't know, become the head of some organization, build something big. Not end up like this, stealing fish at the market." Firmino sighed deeply and let go of her shoulders. "And you, what are you helping with?" Have you found any rich ladies to support you? The ones you used to cheat on? She let out a bitter laugh. Here in this hole. There are none of those. And even if there were, I'm no longer that young girl who attracted any fool. And if we went back to the capital, it would be hard to compete with so many young girls trying to get to me. Firmino gave a crooked smile, as if he was coming up with an idea. But who knows, maybe our luck won't change soon. It's a good thing we have Alice, Firmino said with a lopsided smile. She'll soon grow up, and since she's so pretty, she'll end up catching the attention of some wealthy old man. The kind who not only supports her, but us as well. Thais raised her eyes to the sky, as if saying a prayer. May it be so, because up until now, this girl has only brought us expenses, she muttered ironically. Then, her face became more serious. But I don't know if she'll accept this, Firmino. Alice has always been very proper, full of principles. She's always talking about right and wrong. The man's expression immediately closed, becoming tense. You'll have to accept it. We've sacrificed ourselves for her our whole lives. We raised her the best way we could. When the time comes, it's only fair that she repays us. He glanced around the house, frowning. By the way, where is this girl? She's at her friend's house, Thais replied, turning her attention back to the fish. In that modest home, this was the routine. Firmino and Thais lived off scams, petty thefts and opportunistic thefts. They never considered honest work as a real alternative. Meanwhile, Alice, at 13 years old, remained oblivious to her parents' true nature. Despite noticing certain contradictions, she still believed that they led an honest life. Innocent, she dreamed of a future completely different from the one they had planned for her, a path that did not include luxuries at the cost of arranged marriages. Without knowing it, the course of Alice's life was about to change drastically. That night, after a modest but tasty dinner, a simple fish stew, she kissed her parents goodbye and went to her room. As usual, she lay down on the bed with a book in her hands, losing herself in the pages of distant worlds, where everything seemed possible. Meanwhile, in the living room, Firmino sprawled out on the old sofa next to Thais. The couple distractedly watched whatever was on TV, although most of their attention was on the cell phones they were holding. The night went on without any news, until Firmino suddenly jumped up from the sofa, startling Thais. "What's up, man?" she complained, putting her hand to her chest. "You're going to give me a heart attack." Firmino didn't answer right away. With wide eyes and a smile full of ulterior motives, he held out the cell phone to his wife. "Take a look at this." On the screen, the headline caught the eye: "Billionaire sheik of Saudi Arabia is looking for a wife." Thais frowned, confused. "And what's so big about that? A wedding in the East has nothing to do with us." Firmino shook his head, still with that look of someone who had an idea. "But he's still looking for a bride. He hasn't chosen anyone yet." She read the headline more carefully, but she was still skeptical. "So what? As if he'd look over here, to our corner of the world. Us of all people." It was then that Firmino leaned in, his eyes shining with an almost childish mischief. "It says here that he's looking for someone with very specific characteristics." Thais raised an eyebrow, joking. "Oh no. Do you think it's for me? Are you going to sign me up, is that it?" He burst out laughing. "Of course not, woman. You said yourself today that you're not a little girl anymore." "Thank you for your kindness," she replied sarcastically. "And what about this sheik? He must be a walking museum with so many wrinkles. An old man like that must be looking for someone his own age, or older," Thais commented, still trying to understand her husband's enthusiasm. Firmino held back a laugh and replied. "You're mistaken. He made it very clear what he wants, a 13-year-old girl. No more, no less." Thais put her hand to her mouth, shocked. 13. Seriously? A girl that age, is that allowed? Here in Brazil, of course not, Firmino replied, shrugging his shoulders. But there, in Saudi Arabia, it's allowed by law. Getting closer to his wife, he whispered conspiratorially. And you know who just turned 13, right? Thais widened her eyes, taking a moment to understand what her husband was getting at. He held her hand firmly, staring at her intensely. Think about it. This article says the wedding will take place in a few weeks. He wants a young woman who is exactly that age. Alice fits the bill perfectly. And that's not all, he continued excitedly, she's pretty, has a delicate manner and even knows a few words in Arabic. She's always liked that culture, remember? Thais moved her hand away, shaking her head. You must be crazy. Even if I went into this madness, how are we going to get there? We barely have enough money for the basics here at home. What are we going to pay for a ticket to another continent with? Firmino sighed, getting up from the couch with a determined look. Calm down, woman. Listen to what I'm thinking. I have a plan. We may not have the money, but we have this house here, Firmino said, looking around. Small, yes, but it's in a good spot, close to the beach. The neighbor keeps saying he wants to buy it to set up a guest house. Thais narrowed her eyes, slowly realizing what her husband was getting at. If we sell it, she began. That's right, he finished. We'll use the money from the sale to buy the tickets and fly to Saudi Arabia. There, we'll introduce Alice to the sheik. If she's chosen, he'll pay the dowry and that's it, a new life. Besides, she'll become the wife of a billionaire who doesn't even have children, he concluded, with a greedy glint in his eyes. Thais let out a nervous laugh, not knowing whether to laugh at the boldness or the absurdity. In theory, everything seems wonderful. But what about in practice? Do you really think Alice would be chosen? Imagine how many girls will apply from all over the world, the chances are almost zero. Firmino moved closer, trying to convince her. Trust me, Thais. We raised her with care. She's pretty, polite, and has a delicate manner that draws attention. And she even knows a few words in Arabic, remember? That could make all the difference. Thais sighed deeply, hesitating. What if it doesn't work out? What if she's not the chosen one? We'll have sold our only asset and will be alone in a strange country, without knowing anyone or speaking the language. It's a huge risk. He placed his hands on his wife's shoulders and replied with conviction. It might be risky, but I believe it will work out. And even if it doesn't work out with that sheik, I've thought of an alternative. She looked at him intently. What's your plan B? Firmino gave her a knowing smile. Simple. If it's not him, it'll be someone else. That place is full of old millionaires who dream of a young, pretty girl. Alice might end up catching the attention of some other rich guy. One or two of them will want her. We'll come back from there with our lives sorted out. Thais crossed her arms, visibly apprehensive. What if it's not that simple? What if no one is interested? Trust me, just this one more time, Firmino insisted, squeezing his wife's hands firmly. I feel like this is going to work out. Thais took a deep breath. There was a brief silence before she reluctantly nodded slightly. I hope you're not fooling yourself, she murmured. I'm not. This time luck is on our side. We're going to have everything we've ever dreamed of, money, comfort, and prestige. I promised I'd give you the life of a queen, remember? It's time to keep that promise. In the following days, the couple began to put their plan into action. They sold the house to a neighbor who had been showing interest for some time, closing the deal for a fair price with a short notice to vacate. With the money from the sale, they began the process of obtaining documents, applying for passports, and starting to prepare for their trip to Saudi Arabia. The routine became hectic, and even with a heavy heart, Thais participated in everything. At times, she thought about giving up, overcome by doubts and guilt. But Firmino always convinced her with his confident manner and his impassioned speeches about a promising future. During a trip to the capital to sort out the paperwork, Alice seemed surprised by the sudden trip. "Dad, Mom, why did we come here out of nowhere?" she asked with a frown. Already expecting the question, Firmino answered with the calmness of someone who had rehearsed every sentence. "I won a raffle, my princess. An all-expenses-paid trip to anywhere in the world. I could take 2 people, and of course I chose you. And since I know you always liked that culture, I chose Saudi Arabia as our destination." Alice smiled broadly, her eyes shining with excitement. "Really? Are you serious?" She turned to her mother, seeking confirmation. Thais forced a smile and nodded. "Yes, my love. We're going to make your dream come true." Unsuspecting, Alice hugged them with joy, imagining that this journey would be the beginning of an incredible experience. She had no idea what her parents' real plans were, or how much her life was about to change. 2 weeks later, with everything ready, the trip was about to begin. After a long and exhausting journey, Alice landed in a place that seemed to have come straight out of the pages of the stories she had read so often. It was as if she had been transported to an enchanted world. The palace she was now standing in was majestic, with golden columns and colored stained glass windows that filtered the light of the sunset, creating magical reflections throughout the room. The marble floor gleamed under the last rays of the day, and the walls were adorned with artistic carpets, fine fabrics and intricate designs that told stories in every detail. Around the palace, a lush garden stretched out, with imposing palm trees, intensely scented flowers and fountains that whispered in the warm breeze. Scattered throughout the garden, beautifully arranged tables covered in fine fabrics and vibrant floral arrangements completed the scene. In the center, a lavish banquet displayed an irresistible selection of typical Middle Eastern dishes, accompanied by international recipes, creating a spectacle of colors, smells and flavors. Enchanted, Alice slowly turned around, her eyes wide open at the beauty of the place. "How did you get an invitation to such a grand event?" she asked in surprise, turning to her parents. Thais smiled softly and gently smoothed her daughter's hair. "Everything we do is out of love for you," she replied affectionately. Firmino, at her side, nodded with a satisfied look. "You are everything to us. Our true princess." That night, Alice really did look like royalty. She wore a traditional yellow dress with delicate gold embroidery that sparkled in the ambient light. Small pearls adorned her hair and a light veil partially covered her face, giving her a mysterious and charming air. She felt beautiful, special, like never before. She tried several delicacies from the banquet, tasting unfamiliar spices and sweets that melted in her mouth. Each bite was a new surprise, a flavor she had never tasted before. But after enjoying the dishes and marveling at the surroundings, something made her pause. She looked away from the enchanting scenery and began to pay attention to the people around her. Until then, everything had seemed too magical. Alice was so amazed by the scenery around her that she took a while to notice the other guests. When she finally looked away from the lights and decorations, something caught her attention, and caused immediate discomfort. At every table there was the same configuration, a man, a woman, and a young girl her own age. Each girl was dressed in impeccable traditional attire, some with gold embroidery and delicate adornments. However, despite the luxury, what predominated on the faces of most of them was an expression of apprehension and melancholy. Frowning, Alice commented in a low voice. "Mother, father, have you noticed that at every table there is always a couple with a girl? All of them about my age?" Before she could hear a response, a bright light illuminated a platform set up in the center of the garden. Instantly, conversation ceased. The sound of the fountains disappeared under the sudden silence. A man dressed in exuberant traditional clothing appeared on the stage. His countenance was austere, exuding authority. Beside him was another man dressed in simpler clothes, perhaps an advisor or an assistant. Alice held her breath as she recognized who that man was. It was the sheik, the owner of that immense palace. The older man approached the microphone and, in a firm voice, began his speech. "Good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me yet, I am Omar, ruler of this land, he declared in Arabic. Although she only understood part of the language, Alice managed to understand the essence of what he was saying. His words were full of formality and purpose. As he continued to speak, she felt a discomfort grow inside her that was hard to explain. When the sheik announced that night, he would choose his future wife from among the guests present, a shiver ran through her body. The blood seemed to freeze in her veins. Alice looked around again. Now, everything made sense. Those girls were not there by chance. They had been taken to that place to be evaluated as possible brides. With her heart racing, she turned to her parents, distressed. Mom. Dad, is he going to choose one of us? Is he really going to marry a girl? For the first time, Thais and Firmino's faces lost any trace of sweetness. There was coldness in their eyes and firmness in their expressions. Stay calm and smile. No scenes, Firmino whispered in a restrained but rigid tone. Terrified, Alice tried to maintain her composure. She remained seated, struggling to control the panic that was growing inside her. Meanwhile, Sheikh Omar began to walk through the garden accompanied by Ismail, his faithful assistant. The sound of their footsteps echoed on the polished marble, mixed with the soft bubbling of the fountains. Each table became a stage of expectation. Fathers and mothers waited tensely, trying to show pride and hope. As he approached the first group, Omar was greeted with bows. The young woman's father immediately stepped forward, trying to impress. Your Majesty, this is my daughter. She is beautiful, educated and will be a perfect wife for you, he said with enthusiasm disguised as respect. In a hurry and with anxiety, the mother quickly added to her father's praise. She knows how to take care of the house, she cooks like no one else and she even learned to dance like the women here. She's the perfect choice. The young woman, frightened, kept her eyes fixed on the floor. Her hands were shaking and her voice, almost inaudible, came out like a memorized repetition of the words she had heard so many times. Yes. I am the ideal wife. Omar remained expressionless. After a brief silence, he replied coldly. None of that matters. The only thing I want to see, are the girl's feet. If they are as I imagine, she will be my bride. The father, confused, hesitated for a moment. The feet? Before he could say anything else, the mother, already understanding what was expected, bent down and quickly removed her daughter's shoes, showing the girl's feet to the sheik. Look, sir, delicate, clean and beautiful. Exactly like those of a princess. Omar then crouched down in front of the girl. His time-marked fingers touched the girl's foot with precision and attention. His serious face did not change during the silent examination. A few seconds later, he stood up and shook his head. It's no good. It's not what I'm looking for. Get out of my palace. The parents, visibly frustrated, obeyed without asking questions. Omar and his faithful assistant, Ismail, went to the next table. And so the ritual continued. Table after table, the parents hurried to highlight the virtues of their daughters, even though they were meticulously dressed, showed fear in their eyes. The sheik, impassive, carefully analyzed the feet of each one. He repeated the same gesture, he shook his head in denial. None of them seemed to meet his mysterious criteria for choosing. Alice watched everything with her heart racing. Sweat ran down her hands, and her legs threatened to give way. Each refusal increased the tension in her chest. She didn't understand the reason for her fixation on something so specific, but she knew that the closer the man got, the harder it was to contain her nervousness. When Omar finally arrived at her table, Firmino stepped forward with rehearsed enthusiasm. Your Highness, here is our daughter, Alice. She is beautiful, polite and understands a few words of your language. A true jewel for you. Thais, trying to reinforce the image, quickly added. She knows how to sew, cooks very well and is obedient. A perfect companion. Ismail carefully translated each word spoken to the sheik's ears, who listened attentively. Alice, still seated, could barely process what was happening. The idea that her own parents were giving their lives to a man who could be her grandfather seemed absurd. It was as if they were trading their youth for prestige. Even in shock, she tried to hold on to the hope that she would be just another one among so many rejected candidates. After all, several others had already been rejected, why would it be any different for her? Omar, however, raised one of his hands, signaling his willingness. "I want to see the young woman's feet. Show them to me now." Without hesitation, Thais quickly knelt down and took off her daughter's shoes. Alice tried to resist, but heard her mother whisper firmly. "Stay still. Don't ruin everything." The sheik slowly bent down, held the girl's feet in his time-scarred hands, and examined them with an almost ritualistic attention. Silence filled the room, as if everyone was holding their breath. And then, something unprecedented happened, a slight smile appeared on his face, breaking the cold expression he had maintained all night. Then he stood up and, in a resolute voice, announced. "It's her. The young woman in front of me will be my bride. The choice is made. There will be no other." Ismail translated immediately. Firmino and Thais, for a moment, seemed surprised, but soon smiled broadly. The father, beaming, hugged his wife and exclaimed. "We did it. Our daughter will be queen." Alice, in a state of despair, shook her head, trying to fight that reality. "No. I don't want to. I can't get married. I'm still a child." But before he could say anything else, Thais covered his mouth tightly and whispered. "Silence. Don't miss this opportunity. Obey." Meanwhile, discontent began to grow among the other guests. Parents stood up, indignant. "Your Majesty, this is unfair. You haven't seen my daughter yet. Her feet are the most beautiful in the kingdom. My girls are as soft as petals. Fragrant." Omar, impassive, raised his hand for silence. "My decision is made. I will not go back. Everyone else may leave. The chosen family will be shown to the best rooms in the palace." The firm and authoritative tone left no room for discussion. A murmur of frustration spread through the garden, but no one dared to disobey. One by one, parents left the place, some daughters crying, either out of sadness or relief. Alice, astonished, looked around, trying to find an escape route. But every exit was guarded by guards, or by the harsh reality that was imposing itself upon her. The fate she had feared so much was now inevitable. She needed to find a way to escape. She just didn't know how yet. Shortly after, the sheik ordered Ismail to take the family to the private rooms. The ever-faithful assistant obeyed without question, but inside he felt uneasy. For the first time, he felt the weight of a decision he couldn't support. Thais, Firmino and young Alice were guided to a luxurious room. The doors opened revealing a setting worthy of royalty, beds covered in fine fabrics, golden curtains dancing in the wind, Persian rugs underfoot. Any other girl would have been enchanted by such beauty. But for Alice, that place was just an ornate prison. As soon as she entered, she sat on the edge of the bed and cried silently. Thais and Firmino, oblivious to their daughter's pain, were overcome with excitement. The mother observed everything around her with fascination. "I could live here forever, Firmino." He laughed out loud and replied. "You think so small. Our daughter will be the wife of one of the most powerful men in the Arab world. I don't want just this room. I want a castle just for us. That's it." Thais celebrated, clapping her hands. "With maids serving me and travels all over the world." While the two daydreamed about the future they imagined to be glorious, Alice was in tears, her face wet with pain. "Can't you see that I'm suffering? I don't want this marriage. I don't want to marry anyone. I'm still just a girl." The parents approached, trying to appear affectionate. Thais ran her hand over her daughter's face and said, with false tenderness. "My princess, you will have everything. You will be treated like a queen. Queen! Thais exclaimed enthusiastically. Firmino added, in a reprimanding tone. You should be grateful for this chance. There are girls out there who would give anything to be in your place. Alice wiped her face with the back of her hand and replied firmly. I don't want riches. I want to live my life, run around, dive in the sea, be free. Before she could continue, Thais made a brusque gesture with her hand. That's enough. You're going to get married, whether you like it or not. It's time to repay everything we've done for you. Realizing that her voice wouldn't have any weight in that imposed decision, Alice fell silent, but inside, her indignation only grew. She sat on the edge of the bed, while her parents, excited, jumped on the other side, excited about their future plans. Shall we visit Paris, London, New York? Thais dreamed, enchanted by the possibilities. Firmino laughed happily. And best of all, without having to work a single day. The conversation continued, carried on by daydreams, until the voices gave in to tiredness, replaced by heavy snores. Finally, they fell into a deep sleep. Alice, still awake, stared at the ceiling. Her thoughts spun like a whirlwind. I will not let them decide my future for me. I will not become the wife of any sheik. Determined, she murmured to herself, silently. She knew she had to act that very night, before everything became irreversible. Carefully, she approached her mother's bag and, without making a sound, took her documents and passport. Alice carefully hid the documents under her clothes. Then her eyes fell on a pile of blankets in the corner of the room. Wasting no time, she began to tie them together, improvising a strong rope. She tied one end to the base of the bed and threw the other out the window, taking a deep breath. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life next to an old man. That's definitely not going to happen, she muttered to herself. With impressive courage for someone so young, she began to climb down the side of the castle. Her hands burned from the friction, and her heart raced with each meter she climbed, but she didn't hesitate. When she finally reached the ground, she found herself in the middle of the palace gardens. The scent of flowers mingled with the silence of the night, interrupted only by the soft sound of the fountains. Trying to stay calm, she tried to memorize the path to the main gate. She ran between the flower beds, but when she reached the large gate, her hope was dashed. It was locked and its height made any attempt to climb it impossible. The iron bars seemed unbreakable. Still, Alice did not give up. She began to walk around the castle cautiously, observing the movements of the guards and slipping between shadows and bushes, doing everything she could to avoid being noticed. However, while she kept her eyes on the soldiers, she did not notice that someone was watching her from afar, someone she would never have imagined finding there. Ismail, the sheik's loyal servant, wandered around the castle, filled with restless thoughts. What had happened that day would not leave his head. No matter how hard he tried to accept it, he could not understand why his lord wanted to marry such a young girl. The conflict between duty and conscience prevented him from sleeping. Driven by this restlessness, he went out to get some air, trying to find answers to a dilemma that was suffocating him inside. Ismail, restless, decided to approach the window to breathe the night air. As he pulled back the curtain, his eyes were drawn to something unusual. In the tower next to the sheik's room, sheets were hanging intertwined, forming a makeshift rope. It took him a moment to understand what was happening. She's trying to run away, he muttered to himself. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Deep down, he was against that marriage. He perfectly understood the young woman's distress, anyone in her situation would do the same. But then he remembered the oath of loyalty to Sheikh Omar, a commitment that had accompanied him for years. The idea of disobeying could cost him not only his position, but his very life. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the choice. Forgive me, girl. I can't break my word, he said in a low voice, deciding, against his will, to go after her. Meanwhile, Alice continued exploring the surroundings in search of a way out. After walking through the gardens, she spotted an ancient opening, almost hidden by vines, a drainage tunnel. Maybe this will work, she whispered, slipping into the narrow hole and crawling through the dark interior. It was then that she felt a firm hand grab her arm. No. Please, she shouted, turning around and seeing Ismail. I know you don't want this. I can see it in your eyes. You're good, I can feel it. Please, don't take me back. Her words cut Ismail like daggers. His eyes filled with tears. I have no choice, she whispered, her voice breaking. Maybe the sheik has his reasons. I don't know. But I can't go against him. Even though he was visibly shaken, he held the girl's arm firmly and began to take her back. Alice screamed and cried, begging between sobs. I just want to be free. Her screams woke Thais and Firmino, who hurriedly left the room. When she saw her daughter being brought in by Ismail, Thais put her hands to her head in despair. Are you crazy? You almost ruined everything, she shouted. Furious, Firmino approached and, without thinking, slapped the girl violently across the face, something he had never done before. You ungrateful girl. We killed ourselves for you. Now it's your turn to do something for us. You're not going to run away from your responsibilities. Alice cried uncontrollably. I just want to have my own life, to be myself. Enough. Thais said firmly. You're going to get married and that's it. From that night on, her parents began to watch her tirelessly. During the day, they wouldn't leave her alone for even a minute. They took turns not sleeping at night, fearing another escape attempt. Now, between sweet words and veiled threats, they tried to convince her that everything was for her own good. You'll understand one day, Thais said. We'll see you happy, like a real princess. It's the best possible future, Firmino added. But Alice no longer believed it. It was clear to her, she was just a bargaining chip, a daughter used as currency to achieve luxury and prestige. Time passed, and the much-feared day arrived. Alice was dressed as a fairy-tale princess. She wore an elaborate costume, embroidered with golden threads and adorned with sparkling jewels. Her hair, tied in an elegant bun, was adorned with pearls, but none of that made her feel special. Inside, it was as if she were preparing for her own exile. Her parents walked her to the altar, one step at a time, as if each movement were too heavy a burden for such a young girl. Alice kept her eyes open, scanning the place for one last chance to escape, but it was useless. Guards were watching every entrance, and any hope of escape seemed to have disappeared. When they finally reached the altar, Thais and Firmino hugged her and kissed her on the cheek. Alice's eyes were swollen and red, but she tried to hold back her tears. Firmino came closer and whispered softly. Just say yes. Accept it and stay silent. Thais, on the other side, also leaned in and whispered. Forgive me. Believe me, this is a blessing. Shortly after, they both walked away, leaving their daughter facing the destiny they had chosen for her. Omar held out his hand. Alice hesitated for a second, but eventually gave in. The touch of his rough, aged hand sent a shiver down her spine. She tried to maintain her composure, but a single tear escaped. Noticing her uneasiness, the sheik leaned forward slightly and asked. Is everything okay, my dear? Alice hurried to dry her face. Yes, it is, we should continue. But Omar was watching her with a different look. There was no longer the stiffness of before, something in his expression had changed. Are you sure? Is everything really okay? He insisted, his tone less authoritative and more curious. Alice looked around, as if seeking strength from somewhere. When her eyes met those of her parents, she saw them shaking their heads in denial, making it clear that she should remain silent. Yet, at that moment. You can trust me, the sheik said calmly. Alice, surprised, saw in his eyes a sincerity that was rare among the adults she knew. With her heart racing, she gathered her courage and broke the silence. I don't want this marriage. I don't want to marry you. Omar smiled slightly and answered calmly. If the bride doesn't want the marriage, then there will be no union. Consider this ceremony over. Immediately, Ismail, the sheikh's right-hand man, began to translate the words so that Firmino and Thais could understand Omar's decision, and also so that he could understand their reaction. Alice's parents were astonished. Firmino was the first to speak, indignant. She doesn't know what she's saying. The marriage will happen, yes. We are the legal guardians, we have the authority to decide. Thais finished, trying to disguise the tension with a forced smile. Exactly, Mr. Sheik. Don't worry about what she said. Alice will make a wonderful wife, she is just scared. It is too much emotion for a young woman. But Omar remained firm, not giving in to their plea. I value my word. If the girl said she does not want it, and I promised I would not force anything, then I keep my promise. The wedding is off. Alice felt her eyes fill with light. For the first time, someone was truly listening to her. The man she had thought was a tyrant was now showing another side, that of someone fair and upright. Omar continued. The truth is that I never wanted to marry Alice. This ceremony was just a way to bring them to me. My true purpose has always been to find my only living descendant. He placed his hand gently on Alice's head and, in a moved voice, declared. My granddaughter. The room fell silent. The revelation seemed unreal. Firmino's eyes widened in disbelief. That's impossible. She can't be your granddaughter. Alice is our daughter. Omar nodded slowly and spoke calmly. Yes, she can. And she is. Then he began to tell his story. He said he had always been faithful to his faith and had built a solid life, married and had an only daughter, his greatest treasure. But everything changed when she fell in love with someone he considered unworthy, a common man, without titles or wealth. I did everything I could to separate them, but the more I interfered, the closer they became, he said, tightening his grip on the staff he was holding. When she got pregnant, I threw her out, overcome with rage. My wife begged me to reconsider, but I was adamant. And I paid dearly for it. His voice trembled. My wife fell ill with sadness and died wanting to see our daughter again. I tried to find her, but it was too late. She had moved with her husband to another country. Brazil. Omar reported that the two of them had died in a car accident, leaving behind only a child. My granddaughter survived. When I got the news, I cried like I had never cried before. I thought everything was lost, until I discovered that there was a chance. She was alive. Alice's eyes widened. Thais and Firmino turned pale. I kept investigating, said Omar. And that's when I discovered something shocking, you were involved in the accident. Your car was there. You took advantage of the chaos and took the child. You raised her with one purpose, to use her as currency to get rich. Thais stammered, unable to form a sentence. Firmino clenched his fists, red with rage. Lies. This is a farce, he shouted. But for Alice, everything finally made sense. The pieces of that puzzle of pain fit together perfectly. She had been deceived all along. Despite the two men's insistent denial, Omar took a step forward. He lifted his tunic, revealing a birthmark on his foot, a unique trait of his lineage. Amazed, Alice looked down and saw the same mark on her own foot. That detail that she had always thought was insignificant now explained everything. I wasn't looking for a wife, Omar said firmly. I was looking for my granddaughter. Firmino still tried to argue. That mark doesn't prove anything. At that moment, Omar signaled to Ismail, who brought a folder with documents. Inside, there was a DNA report. During these days, we've been running tests to be sure. There's no doubt. I planned everything. From publishing the ad calling for suitors to robbing your house. I knew that you would come with the promise of easy money. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any answer. The truth had finally been revealed. Omar broke the silence firmly, and Tai's and Firmino's reaction was immediate. Visibly uncomfortable, they realized there was no way to hide the truth anymore. Their masks fell. The faintly protective tone gave way to cold and ambitious expressions. "Very well," Firmino said, without emotion. "If she is your granddaughter and you want to take her, then take her. But we want the dowry. We raised this girl for years. It is the least we deserve." Tai's nodded disdainfully. "That's right. Take this useless girl. We only want what is ours." Their words hit Alice like a blow. All her life, she had believed in the affection of those she called her parents. Now she saw that she had never been loved, only used, as part of a selfish and cruel plan. With a serious expression, Omar signaled to Ismail, who brought 2 small trunks. He handed one to each of them. "Here is what you want. Now disappear. Don't you dare return to this kingdom or you will pay dearly for it." Inside the chests, gold bars gleamed under the light of the hall. Firmino and Tai's eyes shone greedily. They took the treasures and, without looking back, left the castle in a hurry. Months later, it was learned that they had lost everything in gambling and returned to the poverty from which they should never have left. Back in the palace garden, Omar took a deep breath and approached Alice with a sweet look in his eyes. "This party will no longer be a wedding," he said. "It will be a celebration. A celebration of the reunion between grandfather and granddaughter." He knelt before her, an unexpected gesture for a man of his position. "I apologize, my girl, for everything you suffered. I did what I considered necessary to bring you back. Now I only want one thing: allow me to make up for lost time. I promise to be better than I was with your mother. Let me take care of you, guide your steps, love you as I should have done from the beginning. Will you be my granddaughter? My princess?" Tears ran down Alice's face, not from sadness or fear, but from relief and hope. "Yes, I do." The hall, which was expecting a wedding, applauded with a standing ovation. Instead of a forced union, they witnessed the beginning of a new story. In the following months, Alice began to live with her grandfather. Little by little, she healed the wounds that Omar carried in his heart. He, who had once been rigid and solitary, found a happiness he had never imagined. Alice received the best education, learned about the family business and, over time, became a wise, kind and respected leader. More than that, she was able to live her youth with freedom and joy. When the time came to love, she chose who she would build a life with. She grew up surrounded by true love, without pressure, and discovered what it meant to truly live. And so, the girl who had once been treated like a bargaining chip, became a true princess. If you've read this far, comment, "Princess Alice," so I know you've reached the end. And if this story touched you, I have another even more moving one to share. Just click on the video that's appearing on your screen. A big kiss, and until the next story with a happy ending.